and I'll just read the passage, not a long passage, which I'd like to look at, and it's in second book of Kings, chapter 5. And some, probably all have heard this incident before, but it struck me again recently, and I wanted to speak about it. So it's 2 Kings, 5th chapter, the beginning, and about a general in the Syrian army. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honourable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria, and he was a mighty man of valour, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his lord, saying, Thus and thus did the maid that is, said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now, when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayst recover him from his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel heard the letter, that he rent his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man does send me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha the man of God had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper? Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? And he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? Now, how much more rather then, when he said to thee, Wash and be clean? Then he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules' burdens of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice to any other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans upon my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, Behold, my master hath spared Naaman the Syrian in not receiving at his hands that which he brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him, and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from his chariot to meet him, and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master hath sent me, saying, Behold, even now there be come from me, from Mount Ephraim, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver, and 2 changes of garments. And Naaman said, Be content, take 2 talents. 2 talents, not 1. And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, with 2 changes of raiment, garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bare them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hand, and bestowed them in the house, and he let them go. And they departed. But he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said unto him, Whence comest thou, Gehazi? And he said, Thy servant went nowhere, no whither. And he said unto him, Went not mine heart with thee, when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money, and to receive garments, and olive yard, and vineyards, and sheep, and oxen, and men servants, and maid servants? The leprosy, therefore, of Naaman shall cleave unto thee, and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence, a leper as white as snow. So, in fact, I read a bit more than I intended, but you see it's all one narrative about this man. And there's so much to say, but I'll rush part of it, and hope I can say something useful. So the date is about 850 BC, and it's in Israel, a northern kingdom, and this prophet, a man who is Elisha, he's like a spokesman of God. He speaks with this prompting of God to comment on what's going on. And of course it's useful for us as well to hear what he said. And particularly he's talking about the living God. People can't see him, and it's very important that then they should hear about the living God. And he's a God of grace. So I'm just saying this one thing to start off. He is a God of grace. He's not like the gods that people imagine. Because we're human, we try and imagine what is above us, and we can't see, and we know inside that he's there, but what's he like? And it's important to know something that, only God can show us, that he's a God of grace. He's not like the monstrosities that people imagine so easily. Now, so we've got this man Naaman. So he is the most successful man in the northern kingdom. So we've got the northern kingdom of Israel, and then above that, and it's still there, of course, Syria. It's all in the news, and Damascus, the capital. It was the capital then. And that's where the king of Syria lived. And this man Naaman was a very successful general, in the army. So wherever he led, they had these great victories. And of course it wasn't a very nice business, because we find that a lot of the time they'd go raiding. They'd raid the weaker peoples on the over the borders, and they would take people captive. And one of these captives comes out in the narrative. She was a little girl. We don't know what had happened to her family. Perhaps the parents had been killed. It's a cruel, nasty business. Uprooting families, separating a little girl from her family and from her home. And it's very upsetting for a child. And again, that's all in the news, isn't it? We see it on the news. It's happening. That's what the world is like. You know, cruelty, even to children. And but in this world, God's grace is working. This God of grace, we can't see him, but we can know him when his grace touches our life. Now he's working, so and it's called the kingdom of God, isn't it? He's working all the work. He was working then. He's working, and he's in fact building up this kingdom of grace, so that the people are damaged and hurt by all that's going on in the world. And it's not only war, of course. It is illness and all the things that ravage us, sin ravaging our lives. The grace of God redeems us from and brings us back. And it was at work then, even then. Now, you know, Israel was so small, and how many people were hearing what Elisha was saying? But still, the scope of the kingdom actually was that it was to go into all the world. In fact, we know now it is. I mean, people all over the world are reading the same book and hearing about the God of grace. But how does the grace work? Well, it works through the things that are actually happening, good and bad. And some of the bad things we know is what's happened to this little girl. That's bad. But God, it doesn't stop God's grace. God's grace even works through that. And we see that she'd been captured, brought back, she'd been auctioned like a bit of cattle or a bit of goods. And the wife of Naaman, or he himself, he didn't do it himself, it was so, the wife needed somebody to help her do her hair in the morning and all this. And they got this little girl, the poor little thing, but, the Lord's protection was over her. And in this story, something of God's grace comes out, and it's there and it's hidden. We don't notice it. We can't actually see it, but we can experience it. I don't know if you think now this is a good story, but I like a good analogy. And I was brought up in London, South London, and I was very interested in the old history of places. And of course, a lot of history had been forgotten until the Blitz. Now, some of us can remember the Blitz, some are too young to remember the Blitz, but can we remember them? And after the Blitz, of course, I suppose I was born during the Blitz, but then after, when the war was over, just after, I used to go up, and the place in the centre of the city was blasted. But those German high explosive bombs had blown a lot of the old buildings. I mean, around St Paul's and so on was flattened in places. But it had exposed the Roman wall and bastions that had been there. They built houses and offices and all over, and these bombs had blasted this away. And there appeared this, wonder, now you go up there and there's grass all around it and a great monument. Well, perhaps you think that's not a particularly good analogy, but I like it. You know, God's grace can be brought out even by the blasting of the evil things in this world. And this man, one of the things he's suffering from, of course, is that he's a leper, and they can't cure it. It's these bad skin diseases. Leprosy stood for all sorts of skin diseases. They didn't know how to stop them, and people didn't want to touch them because they didn't want to catch these things. So even though Naaman's as rich as anything, he's in favour of the king, he's got a marvellous house and all the rest of it, he has to live in separation. He's not allowed to mix, and people don't want to go near him, and it's a kind of shame. People, if you get something like that, people look at you and think, well, you know, there must be something really wrong with you. You've got some horrible disease, and as if, well, we've all got the disease of sin in it, even if we look quite well. Sin is in us. And this man, well, the story develops. Now, I'm rushing on, but we've just read it. So, in providence, we say the providence, the grace of God works. You don't hear it, you can't see it, but it's at work. And the little girl's been brought into this very family, and she's very chatty like a little girl. We don't know how old she was. You know, she's about 9 or 10 or something like this. She was able to help the Naaman's wife get all the jewels on, etc. And she says, oh, it's such a pity that you don't live in Israel, because there's a prophet in Israel, and he heals people. He's got this God's powers with him, and he's healed them. And well, perhaps they were desperate. They tried everything, all the doctors, all the wonder cures, and there was nothing that money could buy. So this idea doesn't go away, and somehow it's told to the king. He hears about it, and the king really favours Naaman because, you know, he's a great success story. He's the leader, you know, massive, so he's successful, like Montgomery or somebody like this in the war. So no expense spared. So the king said, look, don't worry, I'll write an official letter. You go, get ready, take the time off, any amount of money, you know, take, you know, great pots of money and stuff with you, and I'll write this letter, and you take it right to the king. Don't, you know, go to anybody else. Right to the king. And that's what he does. And so he comes. It says he comes down. He's got all his servants. He's got his chariots. Doesn't walk, of course. He rides, and they get to the palace in Israel, and it's this. There's a message from the king of Syria, and this his top general has brought him. And the king said, "What's all this about?" You know, and he opens this letter, and of course, what does it say? It says, "Well, I've sent this man to you because he's got leprosy. So can you sort it out for him to be cured?" And as we saw, the king of Israel says, "Well, who does he think how does he expect me to? He's sending this man to cure him of an incurable disease." Well, he's just looking for trouble, isn't he? I mean, it's just it's just a way, because they're dangerous. They raid, their armies raid the surrounding countries. We're always worried about their next attack. There's something behind this, and he thinks, well, I think we think the same. Where is this coming from? But again, someone's told Elisha. He hears about this. Do you know? This man has come with all his retinue, and he's going to the king, and there's this hubbub about, you know, he's asking for healing of his disease, and the king's very worried. And so we get in verse 8, to cut a long story short, it was so, in verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, that means he's a spokesman of God, he's a prophet, he had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes. This is what they do in desperation, they tear their garments. That he sent to the king, saying, "Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." It doesn't say, "Oh, he'll come down and I'll see what I can do about his disease." He'll come down and we'll show him that there is a spokesman from God. There's someone. Elijah's just an ordinary man, but God speaks by him. The God of grace speaks by him. Let him come. So what's he going to do? Now, what you think of this? It's Naaman's a pagan. You see, he think that's not to insult anybody. I'm not insulting him, but he thinks like other people. Well, God, what is God? What is this thing? And they think in terms of magic, some sort of magician who has got some kind of link to this unseen force, and so we'll get to this a magician, and so we can imagine Elisha's in his home, in his house, and one of the people that help him say, well, you never guess who's outside, waiting outside in his chariot. It's Naaman, the famous Syrian general, and he's been sent. He's been sent by his master. He's looking for healing. So Elisha says, well, just tell him. Just take this. I'm not going out to see him. Just go and tell him to go and wash 7 times in the River Jordan. And that seems very. It seems very harsh, doesn't it? This man's come all this way. He wants desperate. If you've got a disease like that, you really want. You're not joking when you've come to ask for help. It's crying out, and it's all keyed up, and he wondered what this man will do. What sort of great magic spell he will cast, and what sort of ceremony there will be. And he just gets, somebody comes out and says, oh, by the way, he says, we'll go down to the river, which isn't far away, and go and wash in it 7 times, you'll be all right. And so now it's sort of his turn to be all upset. First of all, it was the king of Israel. Now it's Naaman. And what's he talking about? Go and wash him. I mean, I could have done that at home. And this little Jordan's only a little river, really. And we've got better river. Plenty. We've got the Euphrates, Tigris and Euphrates, and these huge rivers, and I could have done that. It's a kind of stumbling block. God's grace, see, God will be good, but He doesn't put on a kind of show and kind of magic exhibition that people tend to think. So there's a kind of which call it a stumbling block, and the Christian gospel is like that. You see, there's no hullabaloo. It's very simple. You just forget all this stuff, which all the heathen do. I mean, and well, of course, it's symbolised by this. Well, just go and wash, but do it 7. Of course, it symbolises completeness, and you'll be clean. I'd love to go on about that, but I better just keep going so we cover the whole narrative. So he's really up. Of course, he is, in his work, he is the top. He says jump and everybody jumps. He's got power. He is. And somebody says, well, I can't be bothered to come to the door. Just go and do. He is really upset. It could be the first time in his life anyone smoked him like this. We'll just go off and I'm too busy at the moment. Well, Elisha didn't say that, but that's how it looks. And so it says, verse 11, Naaman was wroth, very angry, that means, and went away. And as we said, look, verse 12, I'm at Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel. So he turned and went away in a rage. I've been so keyed up by this and this man has sent me away, and I'm not very happy about that at all. And then the servants, his servants, calm him down and say, well, look, you know, he's not asked you to do it. You would, if he'd asked you to do a big thing, you would have done it. But he's just saying a small thing, you can't do any harm, just go and do it. You come all this way. So, all right, I'll do it. Now, it's very interesting, this bit, because then went he down, verse 14, and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan. He didn't say go and dip yourself. He didn't say get right in the river. He just said wash. He didn't. But of course, so he, as a, bless his heart, you know, this is the way he was brought up. You know, got to make a big sort of ceremony of it. So I've skipped ahead a bit. Can I just go back a little bit? I'm getting carried away with my enthusiasm. But in verse 11. He said, Naaman was wroth and went away and said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of his God and strike his hand over the place and recover. Because he thought he'd be the sort of big magician, you know, he'd come out and, you know, the magic spell. And this is what they always do. They dress up and they make a big thing of themselves. But see, it's not some man. You don't have to go. With God, you don't have to go to a man. Through Christ, the Saviour, we can come straight to God. For grace. This is what's so good. And we could say so much about this because, you know, what can we do? God doesn't say, well, go and jump in the river. Go to the river. But we need washing, our consciences. And if I could just say this, this is relevant for us all, because the worst thing to carry around with you is not leprosy, although that's bad enough. It's to have a bad conscience, to be disturbed that we're you know, there's something wrong, and we feel guilty, and we know we try to forget it, and sometimes you can't forget it. And in the Epistle to the Hebrews, now, I was going to quote at length here, but just because there were lots of ceremonies under the Old Testament, and it's speaking about these, and but God can wash our consciences. We can go to Him to have our conscience washed clean, and know that He accepts us. And we're embraced, and you know, it's not some magician or some great pope or some, you know, some great archbishop. That men tend to cling to these things. No, we go to Him. In Hebrews chapter 9, very briefly, verse 14, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. And it picks up that again in chapter 10. They're longer quotations, but I'm just picking out one verse. Chapter 10, verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Well, we do have baptism as well, but we have baptism with water. But the great thing is God can baptize our souls. We come to Him and He cleanses us through what Christ has done. And it's lovely, I feel, you know, with our sin, and when we remember what we've done wrong, well, often we just forget it. If we've remembered everything, I think we've just dropped dead with horror. But we remember it, but to feel you can just get rid of it. And I hope you don't think this is a bad analogy, but you know, lots of people have junk, don't they? They don't want. You got some. My youngest son, he works with motor mechanics and engines and things. You have these bits of old junk around the place, dirty and annoying. You trip over these things, but take them down to the dump. And there's a good dump in our place and in our little town, and you get these things. And I think, all these things can be, and you forget, if it's on the dump, you can just forget it. It's gone. Well, think of our sins like that. We go to Christ and we lay them before Him, and we just load them onto Him. We just throw all our... But what do we have to do? You just trust Him. It's free. Now, I'm overrunning time now, but if I could just continue, because I think that's why Elisha was keeping right out of it. And he knew what the man would do. The man eventually calmed down, went, he had to get right in the river. Well, all right, that's okay. He did it 7 times. And then he looked at his skin. It wasn't just healed, all the red blotches, all the thing, the whatever it had, the sores and so on. They weren't just clean and dried, but his skin had come back like a baby's. He got more than he ever thought of asking for. And it was so wonderful. And of course, he said, I know, verse 15, behold, I know that there is no God in the earth but in Israel. There's only one. I found him, or he's found me. That's the thing, to find the true God. And he wanted to, of course, I think we do the same. He wanted to go straight back to Elisha and tell him and show him and so on. And he wanted to give a present. And the king had given him all this. It would be thousands in our money, many thousands. A talent was this huge weight of pure silver. And these changes of raiment, these would be rich clothing. So now this has happened. Elisha speaks to him and he says, I'd love to give you something. And he says, no, it's free. See, the pagan mind is just the way we all tend to think. We've got to do something, we've got to give something, kind of like these imaginary gods. You've got to give them some great donation to their temple, or you've got to do these things in order to be accepted. But it's grace is when God says, well, I know you're a sinner. I know what you've done. I know more what you've done than you do. I understand it. But if you come to me, I'll cleanse you. I'll wash you. You're accepted. We're accepted. Who? Even me. Yeah. And so it's very important then. This man is such a prominent man in the army in Syria. You can go back, he'll be full of it, and other people will learn about the true God. So, I'm sure Elisha need, a bit of extra money would be quite useful to him. But he sees it's important for him, for this Naaman, for us today. No, it's not anything that we can do to pay for it. Of course, he wants to worship the true God. He doesn't want. He'd have to go into the pagan temple because that's part of his job, to be with the king. And Elisha says, I know. I know all about that. So I'm not. You don't need to give me anything. It's free, really. I mean, the magicians, they are always after money. That's why I read the thing in Acts. I've overshot the time now, but that's why I said about Acts. There was this man Simon who was this great phony, really. But I mean, he could see when the apostles could lay their hands on people, and God's power was there again, healing them apart from anything else. He said, "Oh wow, I'd love to have that power. I could make a mint of money. I know lots of people I could go and use that with." And he tries to buy. He says, "Well, give me this." And Peter, the Apostle Peter, then says, "Well, you've just done anything. You've got no concept of it. You have no involvement in this whole thing at all. You don't understand. It's free grace." It's not free from God's point of view, because Christ had to die. He had to live the perfect life. He had to suffer the punishment. It's all that when we come and bring our sins, we're loading them onto him. And God has made him the righteous for the unrighteous to bring us to God. And then, but just to cram this in right at the end, Naaman goes off. He's gone his way back. He's full of this. He's amazed at this thing, and what a tremendous example this was. And Gehazi, in verse 20, that he was the sort of manager and general helper to Elisha, and he thought, I know my boss. He's always too generous. This man can afford. He can afford to give us a bit. We've got the wages to pay at the end of the week, and so I understand. Elisha, he's unworldly. He's not a businessman, and so it won't do any harm if I tell a white lie. I'll go up and say, well, there's an emergency. We've got some. So he does that and runs after. Naaman sees him running up the road. He stops. "What's the matter?" He gets down. He says, "Oh well, then these two young men, and they're students, sons of the prophet, etc." "Well, fine. You want a talent of silver? I'll give you 2, plenty, And so he has to get 2 of his soldiers to carry all this stuff, and Gehazi then said, "Well, just stand there," and he goes round the back and stores the stuff away till later and goes in. But of course, I'm sure he's not a terribly bad man who's done something. Or he did something wrong, but he didn't realise. He couldn't see what Elisha was about. And we can be like that. I'm sure I've done things like this, that somebody as a Christian has acted and done something and spoken in a certain way, because above all, this friend wants the person to understand the grace of God. And you bend over backwards, and it always costs something. If you want to try and help somebody else with time, and it may not be money, but time and effort, it's costly. And then someone else, meaning well, rushes in and spoils it. And Gehazi, this was a wonderful example to teach that man and a lot of Syrians about the grace of God, free grace, and you've spoilt it. You've come along, and I'm saying that, I'm sure I've opened my mouth and said something, and it's spoilt it for an outsider. It's I think that it wasn't the end, and I'm sure there was a good message that did go back to Naaman's wife and the king and so on. And we pray that then our lives will be living examples, that we'll encourage other people to know that God's there. We can't see him, we can't touch him, but he's there. We can know his touch in our life. We can know that he accepts us. But we're sinners. How can we go No, we can go straight to him because of Christ as our intercessor, as the one who brings us in close to God. Well, we're going to sing a little bit in the little like